This is UMAR Ahmed for IFL TV in association with MTK Global. Pleasure to have Bob Arum over the phone. Wish we were doing the interview in person, but for obvious reasons, I can't come across the pond. Can't even leave my house at the minute. Probably just like yourself, Bob, or have you been getting out? What have you been doing?
Well, I was just out. We have a track about a half a mile from the house. So I was on the track doing some exercise. You got to keep yourself moving, but no contact with people outside of the home.
Most importantly, how are you and your loved ones? Everything okay health-wise?
Yeah, it's really terrific. Everybody is good. One of my grandsons was in Austria on a Fulbright, and he's come back, and so he's self-quarantined in California. But everybody is fine. Everybody is fine, thank God. And we'll get through this, and we'll come out stronger than ever, hopefully.
That's good to hear, Bob. Before we do talk boxing, the Prime Minister here, Boris Johnson, has faced a bit of criticism about how he's dealing with the situation from the British public. What's it like in the US, and how do you think President Trump is dealing with the pandemic?
Well, Trump is dealing very poorly because he talks too much, and he gets off message. Today in the press conference, he attacked the media, which he does whenever he doesn't know what to say. I mean, the problem with Trump is that he talks too much. It's almost like Eddie Hearn was president of the United States. There's another guy that talks too much.
We will come on to Eddie Hearn in a bit, Bob. Firstly, want to start off with the cancelled shows. Everyone in world boxing is cancelling shows this month, and in April you've done the same. It's unfortunate that you had two shows lined up a couple of weeks ago, last week, with Conlon on Paddy's Day and Shakur on 2 days before, I believe. So how are they, and when do you think those shows can get rescheduled for, Bob, realistically?
Well, if I told you, then I would be just guessing, because, again, the experts don't know when this will be over and when we'll be back to doing sporting events. So it's hard for me. I would never hazard a guess, because it raises expectations based on some people might think that I knew what I was saying, but I don't. I just have no idea. Nobody has any idea. We've never seen anything like this.
Have the US commissions told you anything about when dates could be rescheduled for?
No. Well, all they've done is told us to shut down through April, which we all have. And, the boxing commissions don't have any expertise. They get their marching orders from the governor, and the governor gets it from God knows who. Hopefully from the health services. So again, the last ones that'll be able to give us any guidance are the boxing commissions, because they're as much in the dark as we are.
Okay, that's interesting to hear, because this side of the pond we've had cancelled shows, obviously, but then Eddie has come out and said it's going to be on this date, so he's rescheduled a show for June 27th, I believe, and Frank Warren's done the same with his Dubois-Joyce show. So it's interesting to hear that the Americans are dealing with it slightly different, just have no idea.
Well, again, and who knows? Maybe it's cleared up by then, God willing, and those shows go on. But they have no idea what the situation will be in June, nor do I. But if they think it makes sense to reschedule for June, just hope they're right. Again, I don't know, and I don't profess to know, and neither do they know. So let's just hope that the optimists among us are correct.
Michael had obviously flown out to New York and was getting ready for his big night on Paddy's Day. I'm sure Shakur was properly prepared as well, so it must be absolutely gutting for them. What were the conversations like between yourself and them, Bob?
We just told them that we were shutting it down because the New York Commission advised us to shut it down because the doctors weren't going to be in attendance. And there was a danger, even without and no spectators there, that the disease could be picked up by people who were not testing positive. So we just canceled it. We really had no choice, as nobody else has had a choice, but it was the right thing to do. I mean, it's sad to see fighters, athletes who trained for this period of time, not being able to realize their goal of going into the ring, earning a big payday. But we're in perilous times now, and we all have to make sacrifices. So I'm sorry, and we'll reschedule at the earliest possible date. God knows when that'll be. But we have March 28th, we had Beterbiev fighting in Quebec. That's been canceled now. We have Ancas is filing April 11th in Vegas. That's off. Maloney was fighting, the Australian kid was fighting on the 17th, and that's off. He wouldn't even be able to get into the country now under the present rules. And April 25, we had the monster Inoue from Japan, and he luckily hasn't come to the United States yet, and so he's staying put in Japan. And on May shows, God knows if they go on. Ramirez fights Postal in Fresno on May 9th. I don't know if that's going to happen. So we're all really in a bit of a quandary. But again, so are the basketball players, the NBA. And what about our college seniors who wait 4 years to participate in the college championships called March Madness? And that's all. Baseball, who knows when they're going to start the season. Your football players are all in limbo now. So, it's not boxing only. It's all sports and indeed all activities. We all have to be big boys about it and pick up the pieces when we get it and all clear.
Josh Taylor was obviously another one of your fighters that had to be cancelled as well, his mandatory defence, which was in Scotland, which is a bit of a gutter as well. In terms of Inoue Casemiro, I saw a quote online saying that could have gone to a TV studio. Now, obviously, the commission's banned everything in April, so that couldn't happen.
That's correct. Our original plan was, if we weren't allowed to do spectators, could we do it in a studio in our top-ranked gym? And the answer came back loud and clear, no. So again, and I can understand it. Why put the athletic commission people in jeopardy of getting this disease? I understand this completely. So we'll just have to take a pause now and get going when this is all over. In my lifetime, forget my time in boxing, the only time I've seen anything almost comparable was during the Second World War, when professional boxing really ground to a halt. So, but this is unusual. We've never experienced anything like it. And we all have to pull together and be big boys and stop speculating about, I read something on the internet today about our man Eddie Hearn, who really can't keep his mouth shut, saying, well, maybe if it goes too long, we're going to forget about a Joshua Pulev fight, and maybe Wilder will be out of time so he can fight Fury, and then we can do Joshua and Fury. Well, Pulev is a human being. Wilder is a human being. They have teams behind them. And why excite them and speculate this way when you don't know what you're talking about? I mean, we have to really be cognizant of the participants' feelings, of the other people's feelings. We can't start making projections based on what if. I think that's really harmful. So I would advise my friend Eddie Hearn to button up his lip. I mean, it may be hard for him to keep out of the papers and keep out of the television, but he's got to do it. He can't keep speculating based on nonsense.
Have you seen his other quotes recently as well, saying that there's been these allegations of Tyson from 2015? I don't even really want to go into that because they were that ridiculous. But he's saying that Dylan White should become the WBC champion.
That's really ridiculous. I mean, that's nonsensical, and he shouldn't do it. And I mean, I've read about those allegations. They are so far-fetched. And I mean, why now? Once the guy won the championship, does this guy open up his mouth? You know, I mean, it seems to me to be totally beyond the pale and just ridiculous. Everybody should really take a hiatus from this and start reading books and educating themselves about what's going on in the world, not just the medical situation, but the political situation, the economic situation. People should take this opportunity to educate themselves because obviously so many people can't go into work, so many people, activities have been curtailed. Take advantage of it and educate your mind.
Bob, just to go quickly back to the Commission's stance on banning everything in April, say they were okay with putting on shows behind closed doors. Would you have been for that? What's your view in that with no fans in attendance? How would you have felt about that?
Again, I am not a medical practitioner. I have to be guided by what the people in my state, in my country, in my city have told me. So, initially I thought, hey, what a great idea, do it in the television studio. And then I was told, hey, there are a lot of risks there and we can't do it. And so I stopped any plans, obviously, to do it. Again, the point is, we may be Eddie Hearn, Frank Warren, myself, Al Heyman. We may be big-time boxing promoters, but that doesn't mean that we know a hell of a lot about this pandemic. So for me, I'm going to be guided by the experts, and I am not going to insert myself into the fray because I am not sure I know what I'm talking about when it comes to this pandemic.
Okay, so if the Commission's turned around and said in June you can do shows, we're approving it medically, but we're not allowing fans. So it sounds like from what you're saying, you'd be for that. You'd be okay to put shows on without fans there.
As long as I was given the go-ahead to do it.
Yeah.
And they would be telling me that based on medical advice. In other words, the Commission isn't going to do anything, for example, in Nevada, that the governor doesn't approve of. And the governor has health services advising him, both on the state and federal level. And so if they gave us the go-ahead to go forward, of course I would do it because it would become from good authority. But without it, I'm not going to press it. I'm not going to lobby for it because that would be wrong.
Bob, moving on to the heavyweight division. Tyson Fury has had this glove tampering accusation as well, which again sounds absolutely ridiculous. Anyone who's been to a Vegas fight in a changing room knows that the Commission are with you all the time since you enter the changing room and until you come back from the ring. What have you made of these accusations?
Well, again, I have been in boxing for a long time. And Tyson Fury is not only the best heavyweight in the world, he is the best heavyweight by a long, long distance. And so people then look at some guy who is so much better than the competition, and they say he must be doing something wrong, and they come up with these wild theories. They're just wild theories. The one place I'm sure that you can't screw around with the gloves is in Nevada, because after the gloves are selected and the commission examines the glove, they're in the possession of the commission until they bring them in to the dressing room, and you can't then screw with the gloves because there's inspectors in each of the participants' dressing rooms. So the idea that the gloves were tampered is just fantasy, absolute fantasy. I mean, it's just preposterous.
Your man Kubrat Pulev is scheduled, of course, to fight on June 20th at Tottenham here in London against Anthony Joshua for 3 of the 4 heavyweight belts. As we know, things are in the air at the moment, but that is on for the minute. I do want to read you a quote from Kubrat himself. I don't know if you've seen it, Bob, but he told...
No, he was told. We were told by Frank Smith of Matchroom that the fight would be switched from June to July. And so we told that to Cooper. Now they're saying, well, that's not official. But we were told that, and we immediately informed Pulev, who was in Bulgaria, that it looks like the fight, if it's going to happen, is going to happen in July.
What?
That's the reason for his statement.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. That is interesting to hear, because it seems like the way it's been portrayed online.
I mean, you know, in these times, you know, people have to understand that none of us are operating in our offices. We're operating from home. But Frank did tell us, and I can see that he didn't say definitively it would be in July. He may have said it would probably be in July. And when we communicated with Pulev, we didn't say probably. We said, in effect, or implied definitively, and that's why Kubrat said what he said. No big deal. And Frank's a good guy, Frank Smith. He didn't mean to mislead anybody, but he did tell us that the probability was that it would be in July.
On the fight itself, what makes you believe that Kubrat Pulev will knock Anthony Joshua out?
Because Joshua has no chin. I mean, I know Andy Ruiz. Prior to his first fight with Joshua, every one of Ruiz's fights, except the fight previous to that, were promoted by us. So we are experts on Andy Ruiz. We know how good he is, what he lacks. We know he has very fast hands. We know he has a pretty good chin, but he's not a knockout guy. Trust me, he's not. Look at his record. He fought guys who were sort of ham and eggers and couldn't knock him out. Now, the fact that he knocked out Joshua the way he did indicates to me that Joshua's chin is very, very suspect. And if you had to compare Ruiz with Pulev, Pulev is a much better fighter than Andy Ruiz. So therefore, what I've said is, if Ruiz could knock Joshua out, Pulev has even a better chance to knock him out.
If that is the case, then Pulev and Tyson Fury are both your fighters, both with top rank. That would be so easy to make that undisputed fight. Let's just say, for argument's sake, if Joshua does win, we all want to see that undisputed fight still. It's going to be much harder to make, we believe, with Joshua and Fury. But do you believe that fight gets made? Do you believe Eddie and Anthony will make that fight, Bob?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Why? I mean, you know, they're fighters. I mean, I have no doubt that Eddie Hearn and Anthony Joshua would look forward to making a fight with Tyson Fury. Now, again, there are other fighters involved. You have Pulev. Does that fight happen or not happen? That has to be worked out. You also have Deontay Wilder, who up until February 22nd was considered the most dynamic heavyweight champion of our time, if not all times. Remember, everyone was saying nobody could punch as hard as Deontay Wilder. Maybe that was true. Maybe it's still true. But Wilder has a lot to say about it. He has a contract for a rematch. So before we jump in and start talking about a Fury-Joshua fight, we have to examine where the other two fighters stand in this mix. I mean, but let's assume that Joshua beats Pulev and Fury fights Wilder again and beats him. Then I don't think it would be very difficult to get everybody together in a room and work this out and have a unified champion.
Eddie's gone on record to us and other outlets saying that he's had conversations with you multiple times about that Fury fight. Is that true, Bob?
No. Yes and no. Not really about the fight, not discussing anything about the fight. I talked to Eddie a lot about different fights and Pulev, for example, and he, of course, probably said about wouldn't it be great if we could do a Joshua Fury fight? But no real discussion, nothing even as substantive as you and I are talking about. So I don't want to contradict Eddie and say that he's a liar, but these conversations really were virtually meaningless. You know what I mean?
Okay, because he said that he talked about splits and TV, etc.
Not true. That is not absolutely not true. Not true about venue. Not true about TV. Not true about anything. And besides, Frank Warren says that he's never talked to Eddie Hearn, and I wouldn't talk regarding Fury, anything of substance without Warren being a part of it because he's a co-promoter of Fury.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, I know Frank and Eddie have never actually had a conversation in life before.
Ever, about anything.
No. Do you think that could be a problem, Bob, with making that fight, the relationship or lack of it between Eddie and Frank?
No. Listen, I'm tougher than both of these guys. I beat the shit out of them.
Okay, rounding off the heavyweight division, Jarrell Miller still hasn't fought under you guys. It won't be for a long while now because of this virus. Am I right in saying he was projected to fight on that Lomachenko-Lopez card?
That is correct.
Okay, what kind of opponents are you looking at for Jarrell?
I don't know. My matchmakers were, I think one of the guys we talked about was a French guy named Takam.
Oh, Carlos Takam.
Carlos Takam.
Okay. Lomachenko-Lopez, now that is still officially on, isn't it, Bob? I know everything's up in the air, but...
Well, I don't know what you mean by officially on, because Loma was over here beginning his squaring, and when he heard about the borders closing and so forth, he decamped and he's training in Ukraine. Again, could this fight happen at the end of May? It's all possible. Will it happen? Who knows? I just don't know. Nobody knows. We don't know if fights will happen in May, if fights will happen in June. All we know is that at some point in time, fights will happen. So I'm not going to project that the fight will be postponed. It won't be postponed. It's too early to tell. And it may be that once we get closer to May 30th, we'll say, look, even if we're allowed to go ahead, fighters don't have sufficient time to to train. We don't have a sufficient time to promote the fight. Postpone it to June or July. Again, we're all up in the air, and any kind of projections and so forth are all guesses. And that's not fair to the fans, and it's not fair to the fighters.
I know they're both your guys. How do you see that fight going, Bob? It's a very interesting fight.
It's a good fight. I mean, nobody is technically better than Lomachenko. On the other hand, Lopez is a strong, young guy with a tremendous punch. So, and he's naturally the bigger guy, Lopez is. Lomachenko, is still basically a featherweight that's fighting at lightweight. So, I can see arguments both ways. I would make Lomachenko the favorite in the fight.
Another fight we want to see is your man Bud Crawford against Errol Spence. Errol Spence has come out and said if it doesn't happen this year, it will definitely happen next year. Is that your view on that fight as well, Bob? Spence and Crawford?
Yeah. I really think that if Spence hadn't had that accident, that Al and I would have by now put together a Crawford Spence fight. But given what's happening, who knows when it would take place. But yeah, that fight's going to happen, sure.
We saw yesterday as well, MTK put out that Frampton Heron is a done deal. Again, we don't know whether it's going to actually take place on its scheduled date. But if it does, you're looking forward to coming over to Belfast, Bob, for that?
Oh, I love Belfast. I mean, I'm not looking to come to Belfast if I can't go to the pubs. But as long as I can get the pubs in Belfast are the best in the world. I mean, fun, great people. I had the experience when Conlon fought last summer, coming over to Belfast for a few days. And I just love it. So obviously, I'm looking forward to Carl's fight with Herring in Belfast. When that happens, that's out of my hands.
Well, Bob, thank you very much for your time over the phone. Hopefully we'll see you this summer across the pond in the States. But for now, keep healthy, and same message to all your family and loved ones as well, Bob.
Well, yeah, but that would be good if we could plan to see each other this summer, because that would mean that the pandemic was over or was under control. Because right now, you can't come to visit me, and I can't come to visit you, and just enjoy yourself and read some good books.
Thank you, Bob. Take care. Cheers.
Okay, good talking to you.